You're listening to episode 6 of the Fearless English podcast. Welcome to the Fearless English podcast, where it's all about helping you confidently communicate with anyone without compromising who you are. Let's get started, fearless learner. Today's guest is going to talk about grammar with you and how you can learn grammar. This person is a highly qualified teacher, a good friend of mine, and she is what I would like to call an informal mentor because I have learned so much from her, and I can't wait for you to listen to this podcast because she shares so much knowledge. If you want to find her, her name is Khatuna, and you can check out her YouTube channel, which is called English with KT, as in KT, the letters. And let's get started. Let's meet her. Hello, Khatuna. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, my pleasure.
So, the topic of learning grammar is a controversial one, and many different people and students have an idea of how to learn grammar. You know, there's different ways I can think of now: the traditional way, the lexical approach.
I think the most important point to consider when learning a grammar, any grammar structure, is to decide what do you need. What do you need this grammar structure for? What do you want to express? For example, if you're learning used to, what do I need it for? How am I going to use it? So anytime you learn, for example, learn a grammar item, you need to know the purpose for learning it.
Mhm.
So, for example, I want to learn present perfect. Okay, so why do I need present perfect? So, if I'm going to invest my time to learn present perfect, I have to make sure I need it.
Yeah.
And when you know, for example, you need present perfect because I want to talk about my life experiences and I want to ask someone else about about their life experiences, I won't be able to do it because I don't know present perfect. Okay. So you need to have a clear purpose for learning any grammar item. And then once you know the purpose, then you practice for the same purpose over and over and over. For example, if I want to ask Halima about her life experiences, how am I going to ask her? Am I going to say, "Did you go somewhere? Okay, where you know, have you been to Egypt? Have you done this?" So I need present perfect for that. So my main aim is what do I want to say, how I want to say it, and then you practice in the same context. So the context is very, very important. For example, if I write something, maybe grammar will change. So if I speak something, maybe spoken grammar is different from written grammar. So we have to decide what do I need this grammar item for? I need to write, for example, something, and to be able to write a report, I need passive voice.
And what happens if a student doesn't do that? They don't um understand the purpose or the reason they're learning that specific thing, and they're just going with the flow. Let's say they see a video that the teacher has published and they're like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to just go and watch it." What should they do? Why should they question what they're learning and why?
Because if there is no clear purpose, the language, and there is no context, and there is no need for language, then you will not focus on the meaning. You're going to focus on the form. So when you don't focus on the meaning, when the next time you talk about life experiences, you're not going to remember present perfect. You're just going to, for example, remember and use maybe past simple because we always use the language we know.
I completely agree with you. And I think this is the biggest problem when it comes to, students coming back and saying, I've been learning grammar for years and I still don't know which grammar point to use in a conversation or when I'm writing. So I can see how this can cause students to not really know like why they learned the thing that they've learned, and they just learn it for the sake of learning, especially present perfect. It's infamous for everybody trying to tackle this grammar point. Everybody wants to learn it, but nobody really knows why we're learning the present perfect. They just do it because they feel, because everybody else has said it's so difficult to learn, or I don't understand how to use it. So they go straight to that because they think, oh, I have to learn this specific grammar point because it allows me to communicate better, or whatever the idea. But then they go straight into learning the rules, and then they don't really know like which situations they're supposed to use that specific grammar point. Um, and
Exactly.
so, yeah.
And when you're put in these situations, because you haven't practiced using present perfect in these situations, you're not going to remember it. You're not going to remember
Mm,
and use it. But if you were put in the situation in class when you practice, for example, present perfect to talk about your life experiences, then next time you're put in the same situation, similar situation, you will remember how to
oh,
use it.
perfect. Exactly. It'll come naturally. It's not
Mhm.
forced. And what's
Yes,
happening now is that students are forced to like, to write or create or say things that are not natural, and they're not, like you said, they're never given that situation. They're always given a situation where it's very, I guess what I want to say is like it's empty. There's no context. There's no situation where they would use this specific word or grammar point, and so on. Let's move on to the second point we want to make today. So the first point is to always make sure that you use grammar in context. You ask why am I learning this specific grammar? What is it used for? What is the function?
yes. Another important point is that, to be to before you start, like for example using the say structure, just watch some videos where people use the certain structure,
Yeah,
or for example have a look at the model. For example, if you want to write, for example, a report, and you need to use passive voice, before even you decide that you need to use passive voice for it, you have to learn how to analyze, for example, the language, the grammar. If you listen to a short conversation of people for talk about, so if people are talking about, their changing habits, eating habits, for example, what grammar structure do they use? Do they use present continuous? So you have to watch the videos, or to analyze the language and how they use language in this situation. So how they use grammar. For example, if you're going to write an email, okay, so in the email, you are going to explain something and you use past simple. Before you start doing something similar, just analyze it, see how they use past simple. So always have a look at the model, for example,
yeah,
a conversation or written text, and see how people use it. And just like learning a language is copying, we copy a lot.
yeah.
You
Yeah, I
know,
completely agree. That's how we learn it in the Female Language Academy. And I think that's an important part, because if you take yourself and you think about, say you want to talk about how to, like, say you want to order coffee from a
mhm,
coffee shop. If you've never heard anyone in your life actually order coffee,
mhm,
how will you know what language structure to use? And also, you get to
exactly.
explore the different ways that people actually do it, because not everybody is the same. So different dialects, accents, regions around the world will order coffee differently. So by finding out the example of how how do people actually communicate, how do they order that cup of coffee, then you'll have the example to go by. You're not starting from a blank slate.
Yes, it's important to be able to analyze situations. So to work out exactly what grammar structure they use and how they use it, And so you copy a lot. The first time somebody asked me to write a proposal, I said, "Oh, I have no idea how to write a proposal. What's an organization? Like,
Yeah.
how do I organize? What information goes in a proposal, and what language I use? And every single text you write, you need grammar.
Yeah.
So if you think about it now, like for example, what kind of language, what kind of grammar would you use for a proposal? Like, so I had to have a look at the proposal, different samples, and see, for example, what organization goes there and what grammar they use.
Yeah.
So you just copy, but you should be able to analyze. Re-
So before people, I want to speak about something before you copy. There's a little like a step that maybe we should mention about the noticing part of language, right? So you when you're analyzing, your brain actually notices how the words are structured together, what comes first, second, third, and this is when you're able to actually, you know, manipulate it. But that part of language learning is often I guess like ignored, the noticing aspect. Could you tell us a little bit more about the noticing part of language learning?
Yeah, because like we don't need to be taught or explained to how a language works.
Can you say
I
that
think,
again? Because that if you guys don't like learn anything else, I want you to listen to this part.
yeah, because we don't need to be, nobody has to explain to me, for
Yeah.
example, how why we use a certain grammar structure and how we form it. If you show me a short conversation, okay, people talking about, for example, things they can or can't do. For example, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? I don't need somebody to explain to me, because I can notice that when they're asking each other if they're able to do something, they use the form can you? Can you? Yes, I can. No, I cannot. So I can notice it myself. So I don't need somebody to explain, because when somebody explains to you, we use can to express ability. It's
Yeah.
very hard to understand. What do you mean? So why would somebody explain to me how we use can? You can just like show me a conversation where people use it, why they use it, what meaning they express, and how it's formed. Because you will notice if two people are talking, say, can you do this? Can you do that? Can, can you? Can you? Can you? Yes, I can. No, I cannot.
Mhm.
You will notice and you will start repeating it because you are focusing on the meaning, what they're talking to each other. So, what is the conversation about? Oh, they're asking each other what they can or cannot do. So, how do they do it?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
you
I
can
totally
notice.
agree with that, Katuna. I think that a lot of time is being wasted explaining the grammar
Mhm,
to students, and not enough time getting them to like figure it out themselves, letting the
yeah.
brain do the work. Because once you let the brain figure it out, it you actually become much more receptive to storing that information and being able to
Mhm.
use it in the right time, in the right place.
Yes. And you will remember it and you will, like, we just language learning is copying. We notice something, we see it, then we copy it. That's why sometimes, like for example, if you don't take time to hear people how they express, for example, how they express different things, then you're not able to use it yourself because you were not exposed to the situation, or you didn't have a chance to notice how people use a certain structure. Why would anybody explain to me? Oh, we use, just show me. Let me hear it, and I will figure it out myself. So let
Yeah.
me see it written, and I will figure it out myself. We don't need to, explain. We don't understand the explanation of rules. We don't, even if somebody explains to you a rule, and you don't fully understand it, how it's used, how what function, like what functions are extremely important. What function am I making a request?
Yeah.
Why am I using it for? Like, it's extremely important. And explaining the rule, if somebody explains to you a rule, translate it into your language, what do you understand? It's very hard to understand.
And it's like it's taking up a lot of like time to understand the rule, and not enough time understanding, well, when do I use this, how do I use it, let me figure it out myself. I think not enough time is spent there. And I really do encourage, for those of you listening right now, to just take a few moments before, like when you're learning a new language or a new vocabulary, look how it's used in a sentence. Try
Mhm.
to understand it on your own. Don't be so quick to run to the nearest YouTube video to try and get someone else to explain it to you. And once you go over that part where it's like, okay, I'm going to try and figure it out myself, and you notice the structure, what ends up happening is that you start to notice your own structures and how you like put together sentences. And that's when you notice the gap between what you've seen, being the example of how language is naturally put together, and the difference between yours and the way somebody else speaks. And that's where the gap closes, because you spent that time noticing where the gap between your language level and where you want to be. And I think that's why a lot of students actually stay in a specific level, because they don't spend enough time closing that gap between how am I communicating? Do I notice the mistakes that I'm making, and how it's actually supposed to be said in that like context? And then
Mhm.
closing that gap and being able to quickly correct mistakes that you say, accidentally, or without thinking. Sometimes you're tired, and like, for people, English speakers, when they make a mistake, they tend to like quickly correct themselves because they notice their own gap, they notice their
Mm.
own mistakes. And that's where you want to go. You want to spend that time focusing on noticing language, because I think that is a big part of learning grammar.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, exactly. Like, because, every time, like, for example, I say something and then somebody says it differently, immediately I notice, like, why did this person say, I notice a difference. Like, and I usually say, oh, is this American English or is this dialect, or why is there a difference? And even if your classmates or your friends, or say something that is different than what you're saying, you should be able to notice that this person is saying something else. I'm saying slightly different. What's the difference? It's not about who is right or who is wrong. What's the difference? Why is this, for example, person using a different structure and I'm using a different structure? Are we conveying the same meaning or different meaning? It doesn't have to be that it's correct or incorrect English. No, because all grammar tenses, all grammar structures are correct, but as long as you use it
In the
meaningfully.
right context, yeah.
Mm,
Totally. That, I think, what we've shared today in this podcast is like, you've given students a lot to think about and a lot to ponder. The first, I just want to summarize quickly. The first to think about why is that, why are you learning this
mhm,
specific grammar point? Is there a reason? Is there, a situation where you're going to use that specific grammar? And if there isn't, not to jump on the bandwagon of, okay, I'm just going to learn whatever is out there, whatever the teacher presents to me. It's what I'm going to learn. And instead to say, okay, I really need to focus on being able to speak about the past, being able to speak about my childhood specifically. That's
mhm,
where I'm going to spend, my time, and trying to find content around that specific topic, right?
mhm, mhm,
And the second thing
mhm.
is to, what did we talk about in the second part?
Noticing,
Yeah.
exposure, noticing.
Yeah. So being like I said, like once you realize that, okay, this is what I need to learn, now you've got to go and research videos, input, what is what we call it, podcasts, YouTube videos of people speaking authentically around that specific topic. And
Mhm.
then your next job is to start noticing how they structure the language and what like structure do they use, and how you can start like practicing that same structure that you've heard as an example.
Yeah. It's always important to remember that every time you use any like grammar, because you are conveying meaning, this is why we use grammar. We don't use grammar so we can form correct sentences. We have to use grammar because we are communicating something,
Yeah.
when we write something or when we speak something. So we don't, like if I make a grammar mistake, I shouldn't be worried because I make a grammar mistake. I should be
Mm.
worrying because Halima, will not understand me. If I use it, she
Yes.
will not understand me.
It's
So
the
there,
same with all aspects of language learning, whether you're worried about your pronunciation, whatever it is that you're trying to do, the main objective here is the other person on the other side understanding everything I say to them, and is the communication successful?
Mhm. Yes, because incorrect forms, sometimes incorrect grammar structure. For example, sometimes students say you don't have to do something when they mean you shouldn't do something. So, you know, this may interfere with my understanding of the message, because if you say to me, you don't have to do something, I say, okay, so I have a choice. I have a
Mm.
choice. If I want to do it, I'll do it. If I know I don't have to do it, it's not necessary. But when, for example, when you mean that you shouldn't do something, so this is quite important to use the correct modal verb, because otherwise I may get it wrong. So if you say you shouldn't do something, it's kind of like forbidden. But if you
Yeah.
say you don't have to do it, okay, so I have a choice. I can do it. So it's quite important to use the correct grammar because of the meaning we are conveying.
Thank you so much, Katuna. All of this wisdom. I always love talking to you because I always learn so much as a teacher. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with everybody and your experience, because it is important to share this information, because a lot of people out there are learning, I feel, grammar, vocabulary in a way that is not the easy way. I guess like an easier way would be to listen to some of your advice, and maybe for some of you this advice might not even work. Maybe the traditional way works better for you.
Yeah.
Like I never want to say this is the
Mhm.
definitive this is the definitive way of learning, but it is what we use and what we've seen um, gives like the best results with our own students, right?
Mhm.
So sometimes you've been doing something a certain way and you're not really even sure there's a different way, but
Mhm.
give it a try. And if you feel like it works for you, it does. And if it doesn't, so be it. But the idea is just to walk away from this podcast, like stop this podcast and not just think, okay, like I'm just going to listen and not even take any action.
Yeah.
Pick one specific thing, give it a try. If it doesn't work, you don't lose anything. But if it
Yeah.
does and it makes things easier for you, can you imagine the difference in your own language learning
Yeah.
journey, and how much better it could be?
Yes, and it's extremely important, not just when you're learning grammar, even when you're learning vocabulary, to say, what do I need this for? Like, why do I need these words? To express what? Because the reason why we learn a foreign language, because we want to communicate, you know, to someone, or, it could be spoken, could be written. So we have to always remember, even if you don't take anything in consideration, you just have to remember that you have to ask yourself, why do I need this grammar? So when you need this grammar and you know why you need it, when you're put in similar situations, you, you will be able to use grammar naturally. and meaningfully, and you will communicate meaning and you will focus on the meaning.
Amazing. So, we're gonna move on to the last part, which is just the fire round. I haven't, decided on a name for this section, but we just want to get to know Katuna a little bit. So the first question is, um, first of all, is English your first language?
No, my first language is Georgian, but English is my functional language because I'm able to do more with English than with Georgian.
Same.
Yes.
Yeah.
It,
That's I've never heard anybody express it like that before. But
mhm,
it's really nice to hear that that's your functional language, although your first language is Georgian. Is that
mhm.
how you say it, Georgian?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that is so cool. I'm definitely going to be telling people that exact same.
Hmm.
English is my functional language, everyone.
Hmm.
So,
Yes.
what is your favorite English word?
My favorite English word is empower and
Mm.
empowerment. Empower. It's extremely important. Even like, why do we learn? Why do we teach English? We teach English to empower people. So we, anytime, any situation I'm in, I want to make sure in my personal life or in my professional life, I empower people around me. And this is one of the most important things, I think, when it comes to language teaching or language learning, because, English empowers you. There's lots of information, for example, lots of literature available to you if you speak English.
I'm so with you. I totally agree with everything you've said there. Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is when you think of English, so fearless learner or fearless English, what's the first thing you think of?
Just express yourself, say what you want to say without any fear. It's the thing is, like, before, when I was young, when I was learning for German, I was always worried, like, am I saying this correctly? Am I saying this correctly? I would just ask 10 times before I would say something. Just, can you correct me? Am I saying it correctly? And it's not, shouldn't be the focus. Like, am I communicating? I want to say something to someone. Am I saying it? But because we're so focused on mistakes, am I making mistakes, that I would not say anything freely because I wanted to make sure, is this correct? Is this correct? So every time you say something, this is not something that should come to your, is the person, even if the person doesn't understand you, we, what do we call this? Communication repair. We repair what we say, we explain. So we shouldn't be worried about mistakes.
The next question is, are you learning any other languages?
I'm learning Arabic, but I'm not learning in a traditional sense. I don't go to classes. I learn every day what I need. For example, if I need to say something, I'm going to learn what I need to say. And, I realize that, this is more, it's more effective for me.
Amazing. I didn't know you were learning Arabic. I knew you were like learning bits and bob, but I really like your new kind of way of approaching it because it's much more, I think, memorable when you learn it for a specific purpose. So you're practicing what you're preaching.
Exactly, because when I was going to Arabic classes, I would learn something, then I would say to my students, and they would say, "Oh, that's not what we say. This is not like, this is not, this is very awkward. This is not real. This is not something we say." So I said, why would I spend my time going to these classes and learn something nobody says? Because this is the first thing we have to, yeah, that's why noticing is extremely important. What do people say? How do they say it? What pronunciation they have? So if that's not what people say, why am I learning it?
Love it. Okay, one last thing.
Mhm.
What message would you like to share with the students listening today?
The message I would say, for example, is that you need to watch things for pleasure. We don't need to just Just go to classes, in English classes. Just do things for pleasure, like read for pleasure, watch for pleasure. And one thing I'm really against is subtitles. I'm really against subtitles. Every time, I have a YouTube, on my YouTube channel, people say switch on subtitles. And this is something that I'm really against because, when we are reading the text and we are not listening, we're not practicing listening, we're not used to, we're how people speak. We need to be able to, if you don't understand something on YouTube video or whatever, just replay it, watch it again, watch it again, watch it again. Just repeat the bits you don't understand because when we are reading the text, then we're not like really practicing listening. So every time you are in a real situation where people speak, you're not going to have subtitles. So I'm really against subtitles.
Yeah, I agree with you. But to an extent, I feel like if they absolutely cannot hear what they've
Yes,
listened to, if you have to listen to subtitles, what I would say is listen to it a few times. Like, not, I'm not talking about three, I'm talking about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, until you train your ear to be able to hear what
mhm,
that person is saying. Then once you're like, okay, I just want to check to see if I actually heard this correctly, put on the subtitles and check to see if you actually heard.
just to
But this
check.
is not where your first go to should be.
Yeah. So please
Yeah.
give it a try. Don't go to subtitles. Every time I have requests, I receive emails, put on subtitles, and I want them to try because I always include the script, but I want them to try without subtitles.
Thank you so much, Khatuna. This has been an absolute pleasure as always.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed today's lesson, then you'll love our speaking club, where we take what we learn in these lessons and put it into action. You'll get to meet other women and practice speaking English every week for an hour. All you have to do is go to www.blackboardenglish.com/cup. I'll say that again, www.blackboardenglish.com/cup. Let's work together to help you become a confident English speaker. See you in class.